career advancement in global affairs, diploma programs, and specially funded events working with refugees in northern Iraq, but that's just some of it, plus about 40 public events a year. There's more information over there on the table, so I won't bore you with more. I'm Vera Jelinek, for those of you who do not know me, and I'm the Divisional Dean of the Center for Global Affairs. Among our work, of course, the UN plays a very strong role. I won't go through all the things that we do with the United Nations, but tonight is an example. I'm particularly honored to introduce two amazing women, and I mean that. First, our honored guest, no other, and I'm going to mispronounce it even though she's given me lessons, than Phumzile Mlambo. So far so good, but the next is Ngcuka, right? Ngcuka? Oh, you're getting better close. I'm going to South Africa on December 15th, and I'm going to be practicing. She is UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, an office that she took on in August of 2013. In that capacity, but also in her many, many previous roles, she's been a tireless advocate of women's rights, be it by overseeing programs to combat poverty and raise standards of living with a focus on women, when she served as Deputy President of South Africa from 2005 to 2008, or in earlier senior positions in South African ministries dealing with minerals and energy, trade and industry, as well as a member of parliament in the first democratically elected government in South Africa. She began her career as a teacher. In all her roles, she supported and continues to support women's rights, empowerment, education, and gender equality. To engage her in this discussion tonight, we have our very own, and I could say that, clinical professor, Anne-Marie Goetz, whom we, I won't say stole, but we lured away from UN Women some 3 years ago. Dr. Goetz, like our distinguished guest, straddles a variety of sectors. She too began as an educator at the University of Sussex, where she worked from 1991 for a decade. And then for the next decade, she was with the UN, initially with UNIFEM, and then with the UN's newest agency, namely UN Women, serving as Director of Governance, Peace, and Security. In that role, she led initiatives to promote women's empowerment in the UN's peace-building work, both in the field and in peace talks and post-conflict decision-making. She's written only 7 books on the subjects of gender, politics, and policy in developing countries, the most recent of which, an edited volume, Governing Women, Women's Political Effectiveness in Context of Democratization and Governance Reform. So please join me in joining our wonderful guest and Phumzile Ngcuka and Anne-Marie Goetz.
Thank you so much, Vera, and Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Practiced. It is an honor to have you here and for me to be sitting on stage with my former boss, for whom I have so much respect. I am a little bit nervous, I have to say. But it's a characteristic of you that you told me to call you by your first name, which I appreciate because it's easier than the last one. So I'm grateful for that, Phumzile. And I also would like to just note how wonderful it is to have a UN Undersecretary General here at the Center for Global Affairs, and the head of not just any agency, but the UN's newest piece of institutional architecture, the first entity to be built in many years, UN Women, or the full name, the UN Entity for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. But UNEGWE doesn't sound so great. So the General Assembly came up with UN Women. Now, I actually feel that it's important to acknowledge the elephant in the room right now and to say that it's not even a week since the US election. So many of us still can't breathe. So maybe everyone would like to take a deep breath and wiggle your shoulders a little bit so we can settle into this discussion about rights and equality. And we must remember that the UN didn't set up this organization on a whim. Misogyny is an extremely serious problem for the world. It is as serious as conflict. It is as serious, and it's related to environmental change and climate change. Because misogyny, again, and violence against any woman, anywhere, affects all of us, everywhere, and that's the definition of multilateralism. So we're going to talk today to Phumzile about a range of issues about combating misogyny and sexism and promoting women's equality and women's rights. But since there is an elephant in the room, I am going to start with the US elections. And I have to note that, of course, as a UN leader, Phumzile cannot make a specific comment on the US itself, but I think all of us would like to know, given the enormous global influence of the US, if you would just give us your reaction to what the new administration is going to mean for the fight for women's rights around the world.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for having me here. As it was said, I used to be a teacher. I love coming to institutions of learning. I don't need to be persuaded to come to a place such as a university. Firstly, maybe let me turn the question around and talk about what you have to do as young people and as institutions in order to make sure that you continue to be the beacon of hope and light, that you highlight an inclusive society, and that you do not accept that politics is not a place for women. We have a program with the International Parliamentary Union because we've noticed that around the world it is harder for women to stand for office because they find the backlash, the demeaning language, and the attention to their personality, the double standards about the threshold to be quite discouraging. And the result of that is that we get less and less women to become leaders. And I think that has got to be our life's work. Everywhere we are, in local government, in provincial elections, everywhere in the world, to always encourage and support women to stand up for elections, but also more than anything else, to change the nature of the debate and the space that pushes women back. So here in the US, many of you are feeling that there has been a setback. The global women's movement could feel that they lost an opportunity to have a role model that a girl in Ghana would look up to, a girl in Sri Lanka can look up to and feel, I can also do that. We've lost that opportunity. It is to make sure that light does not dim. It is important that you also know that if you do not organize and do not speak out about what you stand for and what is important for the women and the people of the US, you are likely to allow the space to be occupied by other voices. It is also important to know that sometimes when there are changes, people take the tone from the top and begin to self-censor. That's, again, you engage with the media, you make sure that issues that seem to have reached a point where they seem not to be as offensive as they are to us, for instance, language that is used towards women, the attitude towards issues of sexual harassment, that you speak up about these issues. What comes out of this is the need to be organized, to work harder, and to protect the space as much as possible. I think one redeeming feature of this whole thing is that a lot of young people actually are passionate about gender equality. that they believe in gender equality, and I think that should give us hope. So today you mourn, but tomorrow you must organize. That's important.
So these are important words coming from a freedom fighter. In South Africa, of course, you faced power that was more raw, more extreme than anything that we've seen. And how did you keep your eye on the light at the end of the tunnel and succeed in a non-violent revolution against such oppression?
You know, when you're fighting for rights, whether it is for liberation, whether it is liberation of a country, women's rights, children's rights, as long as there are people on the other side whose rights are under threat, inaction is just not an option. And I think it's important to have that as a strong push and a feeling that spurs you on and that keeps you on. And of course, we also in South Africa were very much encouraged and supported by global solidarity. And one thing that you have to fight against in the US is being isolated, because global solidarity is critical in this day and age also of easy connectivity and networks where we can all be in the same place at the same time. When we need to be around an issue, you have to be part of a bigger world in solidarity with other people and make sure that other people are in solidarity with you. If South Africans had been isolated, if Black South Africans had thought that their struggle was just for them alone, we would not have made the breakthroughs that we made. People here in the US and all over the world who wanted to see a South Africa that worked for everybody made sure that they made that known. So there's something to be said about voice, because I think you have numbers of people who want to protect rights and want gender equality, but those numbers will not mean anything not unless you organize and you give them a voice.
Phumzile, one of the baffling things about the election here, which is mystifying many of us in this room, is that women voted for a outright misogynist, and a majority of white and married women voted for Trump. How can you make sense of this?
I have learned, Sergey, that women are not homogeneous. So I think because you're analytic, you're scholars, that is one thing that I think you need to make sure that you grasp also out of this experience. Just like men are also not homogeneous. There are men who are feminists and there are men who are jerks. So do not give up on all men so that we do not isolate the men that are good for the cause. We need to mobilize them. The other thing is that we also need to spend more time speaking to people that disagree with us. I think all of us who are activists sometimes are guilty of preaching to the choir. Maybe many of the women that are not as progressive as we like them to be are probably not part or a member of any of the organizations or aligned to any of the values that we care about. We have to find a way of reaching out to those people. And I will go back to the media and the importance of making sure that out of this episode, the media, which was very strong in highlighting some of the problems in the dynamics of the debate, must be held accountable to continue to assist in sustaining the debate. So, I mean, the short answer is that we know we have learned again that women are not homogeneous, but also there is sometimes the intersectionality of the issues that impact on women. Women who are, for instance, concerned about a specific issue in their life, sometimes will actually trade off something that is beneficial to them, such as gender equality, because they think they will gain something else. And I think making sure that there's information that helps people to make the right choices is also one of the responsibilities that we have, and that we present the information in the language that people can identify with. We don't speak to ourselves, we don't write to ourselves, we write for the people who disagree with your first sentence. You try to make sure that the first sentence does not turn them off so that they can read the whole page.
Good advice. So what we had planned to talk about tonight, before the elections, was the UN's extraordinary Sustainable Development Goals, its new agenda for equality and peace and planetary integrity. And I'd like to ask you actually perhaps to, you can assume most people know about the SDGs here, but perhaps explain how the SDGs are different from the MDGs from a gender perspective. What's new, what's different now?
I just firstly maybe just a general point that there isn't a disconnect completely between the MDGs and the SDGs, because the SDGs have also taken up a lot of the unfinished business of the MDGs. So some people worry that we just arrived at a point and we cut the SDGs and we started on something completely new. There is a degree of continuity. But what is really different about the two agendas is that the SDGs have learned a lot from the MDGs, which were not as focused on a transformative agenda, for instance. In the SDGs, let me make an example. We focus on decreasing maternal health, on improving maternal health and addressing the challenges of child mortality, but we did not necessarily speak about early and child marriages, which contributes to the increase of avoidable maternal deaths and child mortality. The emphasis of the SDGs, it's about removing the root cause of the problem rather than decreasing the incidence that arise as a result of the underlying problems. The SDGs also are comprehensive in that in each of the 17 goals, we address issues that impact on women and girls and their targets and indicators to help us to gauge the changes that we are making at every turn. When countries report, we will be able to track the difference that we are making. But the one goal that focuses on women and girls is very intense in addressing the issues that impact on women and girls. Because UN Women existed at a time when these goals were being negotiated, we were able to play an active role at every turn to make sure that we protected and we included and we fought for women's agenda. With the help of civil society, the women's movement, private sector was there, and of course quite a number of member states also supported the agenda. The other emphasis about this goal, which is important for women, is that they are universal. These are not the goals where developed countries are trying to help developing countries. And in fact, right now, I don't know if there's really a true concept of a developed countries, because I think everybody is a developing country in some ways. Depending, some you have to develop because of the barriers that you need to address. The pockets of inequality within countries make every country to have a pocket of a developing component of society. And of course, there is also inequality between countries. So the universality of this agenda is very important because everybody has homework to do. Specifically in relation to women, for instance, it emphasizes ending violence against women in the goal that focus. Every country has got that as a problem. So that makes this universal agenda. It focuses on ending all forms of discrimination. There's more than 100 countries in the world that still have laws that discriminate against women. In some cases, you need to repeal, you need to amend, you need to enact, but also you need to implement some of the good laws that have already been passed. Because even in those countries where we do have good laws passed already, they live side by side with norms, stereotypes that are there in every country that work against the good laws that have been passed. So our activism in ending the stereotype and making more visible and more impactful the progressive laws becomes something that we need to apply ourselves to. The goals also focus on underrepresentation of women in decision-making bodies in the economy, in politics, and everywhere. Every country has got that as a problem. It focuses on reproductive rights, sexual health, and not to the extent that would like them a chance for us to take those issues forward. And it focuses on unpaid care work and the need to address the time use of women so that unpaid care work, which weighs heavily on the shoulders of women, can be recognized, redistributed, reduced, and remunerated in some cases. So if you look at all of these issues, if we were to address unpaid care work, just one issue in unpaid care work, childcare. If globally we were to have affordable childcare in every country, game changer for this generation and what is going to happen to the millennials. The US, for instance, federal government, where there is no paid maternity leave. When women, it could be a rock scientist in a top institution, a leading scientist in a country, if you're a woman and you get pregnant, you actually have to use your sick leave in many cases in order to afford maternity and to be able to be at home. And you look at how many women therefore impacts participation in the labor market to achieve gender legislation, national will. And once we actually recognize the importance of overcoming some of those problems, which we could see was happening in countries that were even less resourced than ourselves. You should have seen how much we went into first gear. So accountability isn't always facilitated by the existence of enforcement mechanism, which the UN sometimes doesn't always have. It is about the peer pressure, but it is also about the citizens holding their countries accountable. And that is why it is important, and I'm glad we're talking to students who are studying in this area, to know what your countries sign up to and agree to do. And indeed, the US is one of the countries that signed up to implement the SDGs, accepted the targets and indicators, and therefore you have a mechanism to hold them accountable.
Regarding peer pressure, and this is a comment, I'm not expecting you to make a comment, but as of 14 days ago, according to the Interparliamentary Union, the US ranked 99th in the world in terms of the numbers of women in its legislature. So I hope that some shame will be associated with that. That you didn't say that, I did. Okay. I wanted to move on to
maybe we can invite women from Afghanistan to come and teach the women in the US because they have better numbers.
Better numbers, that's for sure. Okay, so let's get on to the issue of work and income and also the private sector and women's efforts to make a livelihood, to profit from their labor. That's a major part of the SDGs, and you've already mentioned fair pay and maternity leave and support like that. But what about the private sector? What would be the work that UN Women has done around the private sector to kind of work on strengthening women's employment security?
Well, working together with the ILO, who is a leader in this area of work, we participated actively in making sure that in the SDGs, issues such as decent work is addressed, that the provision of infrastructure, which in many countries is a barrier for women's participation. For instance, in countries where there isn't clean water or energy, it is women and young girls who have to fetch water, collect wood, and the amount of time they spend in doing that actually reduces the time that they have to engage in economic activity. I think one of the most disturbing sights that I have is a young girl with her short little wobble legs going to fetch water, carrying a bucket on top of her head to bring water to the house to quench the thirst of muscular men sitting at home. She doesn't do homework, she doesn't play, and in the fullness of time, maybe she just drops out of work because there are just too many jobs for her. So investment in infrastructure is a feminist issue. But even more important, the participation of women in designing and participating in being employed in the sector is even more important. And of course, fiscal policy. Today, thankfully, we have now even the IMF and under President looking at fiscal policy and gender equality. Because the way in which countries and governments spend would actually determine whether the resources that are available in the treasury will benefit women in a significant way. In countries where girls walk a lot to go to school, just providing transport to and from school that is subsidized by government will mean that the number of girls who will drop out of school will be reduced because parents are much more worried about girls walking long distance. They may risk to allow the boys to do so. But also understanding in many countries the importance of the participation of women in the country, and therefore removing the barriers for women's participation, some of which are legal, some of which have to do with access to finance, digital inclusion, goes a long way in making it easy for women to participate, and data. And I appeal to you, data that shows what happens when women participate in the economy. In a country like Turkey, for instance, it is possible for more than 700,000 jobs to be created if Turkey were to provide childcare at the same level as the European countries that do more in the provision of childcare. Almost 1 billion jobs. That would grow the cake.
Almost a million.
Sorry, a million, I'm so ambitious. That would grow the cake, but also when women have an opportunity to work, they remove themselves from some of the harmful practices that impact on them, such as violence against women. So private sector has a responsibility to understand this because they also benefit.
I think with he for she, you're working with private
In he for she, we work for private sector, which is a campaign to engage men and boys. And the companies that sign up at the CEO level to be he for she, one of the commitments they make is to change their practice in their companies. The practices range from equal pay, from adequate representation of women, and from changing the conditions of work in a company. This morning, I was with a team of he for she participants from the different companies. They are working on their next report, and a presentation from a partner from Turkey who are in a company that makes air conditioners. In that company, women were not allowed to work in the assembly line for the air conditioners because it was deemed to be a men's work. It's highly automized, but there was a fuss about women not being able to carry whatever needed to be carried. In the end, there wasn't a lot to carry, but more to press. And that women would lower productivity, they would be absent, and so on. This particular he for she participant was insistent that I actually wanted to change the composition of the labor force in this division. There were only women were only 2% of the women who worked in that division, and he wanted 50-50. And he pushed ahead and get the support of the top boss. Again, the importance of the CEO playing a role in setting the tone. Fast track, 3 years later, he got the 50%. They have reduced margin error in that division. They have reduced absenteeism. Productivity is high, and back to your question about the SDGs and the NDGs, the SDGs is about these kinds of changes that break the mold. Because here you have addressed attitudes and stereotypes about women. You have changed the structure of the workplace forever, so that in years to come in that company, you will not have this excuse, and you will not go back to a situation where women are excluded. One of the excuses was that women are emotional. I don't know. How do you get emotional making an air conditioner? So.
Now, you mentioned breaking the mold, and one of the hardest things to change is unpaid care work, and the fact that women do the majority of it, and it's given no value. And recent research shows something that we've always suspected, which is that women work longer hours than men, more hours than men every week, on paid work and unpaid work. And even more devastating, when men lose jobs, they don't start doing unpaid care work. On the contrary, they send their little girl, their toddler out. That's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. So, I wonder, what's it going to take to change the mold? And I have to point out, in the SDGs, SDG 5.4, Goal 5 is on gender. 5.4 is on, it's extraordinary that this is in the document at all. Recognize and value, as you said, unpaid care and domestic work. So it's a goal to recognize and value this work, and it doesn't say redistribute, and to promote the shared responsibility within the household and the family. So far, so good. And then this is one of only, I think, 2 or 3 of the goal targets that finish in the following way. As, 3 devastating words, as nationally appropriate. So we're going to recognize and value and share unpaid work as nationally appropriate. So you all know what that means. I don't need to spell it out. Can you give us any hope that there are examples of men taking up unpaid care work and valuing it?
Well, with a bit of a push in most cases. Firstly, this was one of the contested weddings. As you know, in the UN, every word matters. You find this language a lot when you talk about reproductive rights as well. Something that is quite transformational for women if addressed correctly. So the pushback was just as strong on the language, and rather than lose the inclusion of this particular aspects in the goals, the negotiators had to accept to have these last words. But what we are trying to do in order to circumvent the potential derail that could come from this wedding, one is to use the targets to measure appropriately the time use of women, and to publish it and to make available. Because not many people actually believe that women work long hours. When I did my gender studies a long time ago, I won't say so that I don't reveal my age, we used to play a game, which was the 24 hours of a man and a woman. So some of you are familiar with that? You have men, women in a family. You create a family. Tom and Jane live, they've got 3 children. She stays at home and doesn't work. He is a construction worker, etc. She gets up at 5 a.m. to boil the water, make the breakfast, wake him up, prepare the breakfast, then work, prepare the children, go to work, come back from school, start addressing house care, go to the market, and start cooking for the evening, bring them back, bathe, etc. And usually throughout the day, she just she never even sit down. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says, even if you just count the number of steps a woman walks inside a room in a household, it will tell you who does more unpaid care work in the house. It gets into the evening, she's the last one to go to sleep when everybody has rested. And usually it's said in the game, if you ask this woman, so what work do you do? She says, no, I don't work, I'm just at home. you know. So I think beginning to measure all of this, because what happens that in the fullest of life, this woman does not have a pension, does not have social care, and that is why so many women at their old age are poor. If they do not have caring families and caring children, which they cannot take for granted, for all this work that they do, they have nothing to show. And I would want to assume that most families, and men and women, do not want their mothers, their wives to end up like this. But it is, we say unpaid care work is not visible. So we have to make it visible so that the men who cannot grasp the need to share this work, so that you reduce this burden of women, can appreciate that. But even more, if we are able to provide some of the infrastructure and the support services so that women can actually leave the home, improve themselves, earn a living, participate in the economy, then you're actually giving them independence and you're also turning them into economic citizens. Again, the studies that look at how much women lose in their lifetime because of unpaid care work and what the ILO calls the motherhood penalty. It ranges between 30 and 70% in some countries, ranging from Turkey to Germany, middle income countries. In the lower income countries, it's even much higher. So this is something that as society we have to be concerned about. We cannot ask women to strengthen themselves so that they can cope with an economy that does not accommodate them appropriately. The economies in our countries must be ready for women, because our economy are built as if women don't exist and do not have these specific challenges. In some ways, it is the world that is not ready for women,
Yes.
believe it or not.
That's right.
It is not that women do not have the capacity to participate. The steps that you need to climb to get on top of the table are just so many for women. What is needed is for this platform to be lower, so that women do not have to climb all the steps. You mustn't be teaching women how to climb these steep steps. It's how to lower the platform so that women do not have to climb those many steps.
For those of you who are interested, there's Progress of the World's Women is on this topic exactly, on the issue of how economies are biased against women, and there's copies on the side. I'd like to move on to probably the most egregious feature of misogyny and sexism, which is violence against women. And as you know, a couple of weeks ago, there was an absolutely horrific gang rape and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Argentina. And we never say these things. I'm going to say how she was killed. It was with a sharp stick. She was stabbed through the vagina and into her internal organs and died of the wounds. And this kind of murder, there was a similar murder in Delhi in 2012 on December 16th that triggered a massive nationwide protest. What is going on? And it's not just in those two countries. There's other examples, and very much this is a feature of sexual violence and conflict, extreme violence aimed at extreme humiliation. What is going on? Is violence increasing, or are we simply becoming more aware of it?
It's both ways. There are some forms of violence that are extremely cruel, that we have seen both in conflict and in non-conflict areas, much worse in conflict areas, as you know. But also there is greater reporting, and women are getting more and more courageous and coming forward. But also in the last 20 years, we have passed many laws that makes it possible for women to get some recourse, even though these laws are yet to be used as effectively as they are meant to be. For instance, when we went to Beijing, there were only a handful of countries that had legislation that criminalized domestic violence. Today, it is a tiny minority of countries that do not have domestic violence as a crime that a woman can report and a husband can face the law. So what we are also seeing is the importance of not allowing the language that trivializes violence against women to be acceptable and to be tolerated. The threshold of tolerance for reckless talk that demeans women, in whether it is in a song, it is in videos, it is whatever. That threshold, that threshold for tolerating that kind of language and activities is so high. So you do not always have more outrage to the extent that you expect it to be when some of these crimes are committed. So once in a while, you may find that there's just a convergence of circumstances that will make society in a particular country stand up and highlight the issue and stand up for the victim. And that always helps us to register how much challenge we're facing and how much we need to take action. But it's actually not happening enough. You know, if you think that 1 out of 3 women, and that statistic is stubbornly standing there, it's not coming down. We get most of our statistics about violence against women from WHO, because the most reliable figures that you can collect on violence against women is the figures that come off the reports that women make when they see their medical practitioner and health workers, because there's privacy, they can be very open, and usually health practitioners are able to track and see injuries and see even psychological impact and so on, and then they're able to see a pattern. So we think that there's still a lot of women who do not have access to these services, whose violence goes unreported. We're seeing an increase of gang rape, for instance, but we are not seeing an increase of successful prosecution. So there is also a disconnect between the level of transparency, the increased outrage, even though I still think that it's more of an exception than a rule that society takes on the issue. That does not translate into greater activity on the part of the law enforcers. Part of what we are trying to do ourselves as real women now is to work with governments to train judges, magistrates, police, for them to understand their responsibility better, but also to engage them on their own biases towards women. Because you will find that many women also will not report because of the trauma they experience when they are in a police station. Men and women, for them. A man who goes to report violence, even though violence against women is not that frequent, but it does happen, would find that she'll be laughed at for not being able to fight back, or rather to beat up the woman. A woman who goes to report will be also ill-treated because she's complaining about something that she should accept. So either way, society loses, and this value system is not acceptable. In 2012, about 47% of women who were killed violently were killed by an intimate partner. And that's a high percentage of women who died in the hands of a loved one. With men, that same number is at 6%. I also don't want men to be killed, but you can see the disparity. I mean, every death is a death too many. So you want actually to make sure that it stops for both men and women. So again, voice. We need voice. We need sustained outrage. We must not tolerate the language that makes violence against women, demeaning women, sexual harassment, something that you could laugh about. It is never a joke. Sexism, racism, homophobia, all of those tendencies must never be taken lightly, because they become a way of life, and people develop tolerance for them, and
then vote their entire government. Speaking of voice, we will be turning to the audience for questions in a moment. I'm just going to ask 2.5 more quick questions. I was going to ask you about conflict, but I'm going to perhaps leave that to the side and ask you a slightly lighter question, given how challenging some of this material is. Was it harder to be Vice President of South Africa or Under Secretary General of UN Women?
I think it's the same. I think it's the same because dealing with issues, challenges of the women of the world who represent a constituency that has got all of the biggest problems you can think of in the world on one hand, and not always being able to be everywhere you would like to be, not always having the resources that you need, and always having to convince the people about the correctness of the work that we are doing. When you are dealing with government, the numbers maybe are smaller than the numbers you have to deal with when you are trying to address the issues of the women of the world, but it is also intense. It is in your face. It is every day. And you're dealing in both cases with bureaucracy, which can be a challenge. You are also dealing a lot with the competing agendas and needs that need to be addressed. And in my country, even though we were one of the countries with a progressive and advanced constitution, we did not have masses and thousands of civil servants that were ready to implement that constitution. So every action was also about still lobbying people to accept, to embrace the constitution, and to make sure that it is implemented in the spirit and letter. So the level of intensity is the same both ways.
But you've got a big challenge. You've got 4 billion people, 3.5 billion, who need your help.
Yeah. In some ways, actually, I think the UN Women job is more difficult.
Yes. It was very interesting what you said, that the validity of the problem you're addressing is questioned every single day by donors, and that's why.
And that's where you come in, because we need you as scholars to continuously churn out information, data, evidence that makes the case. I need your help, guys. I cannot make this case. We cannot make this case alone, those of us who work on this issue full-time. We also need you to be full-time activists on these issues and to use your capacity to write, to publish, to argue, to help us make the point.
Are you going to be able to hang around a little bit afterwards and so all the students can tell you how committed they are to this? I wanted to ask you a quick question about youth. One of the, again, upsetting things about the US election, sorry, I keep coming back to it, and I'm not asking you to comment on it, but millennials were saying, feminist, it's done, we got there, we won, it's not a big issue for us. So how do you get youth involved, and how do you persuade young men that women's rights are going to be good for them? How do you get youth involved in the work that you do?
Firstly, I think it is important that when we speak to young people who think that that's been done, you ask them about the violence against women that is in all our societies. If that's done, you shouldn't be experiencing this degree of violence against women. I think you should ask them how many women lead corporations, sit in boards, are leading countries. If the answer is no, statistics is speaking for itself. If that is all done, how come we also still have unequal pay for work of equal value across the board? In the US, I think the average pay that women get compared to that of the men, the women
Pay gap, the
pay
differential.
gap between men and women is 24%. That is why I think in Iceland not so long ago, women decided that they were going to work 24% less in a day in order for them not to do work that they are not paid for.
Yes.
But also there's even a bigger challenge. If you're a woman of color, if you're an indigenous woman, if you're a disabled woman, you get less and less and less. And so there isn't a country where this issue has been addressed satisfactorily. So millennials need to make sure that we fight harder, because we know a lot now about where to focus in. It is possible for us, if we focus together on addressing these challenges, that we can actually turn the tide. And we need to mobilize men and not reject the participation of men. We need to make sure that we don't spend all of our time only speaking to each other. We need to expand the network of activists who are taking part in the struggle for gender equality. You need religious leaders, you need the media, you need cultural actors, etc. So you cannot only depend on women, and also women are doing so much. You know, it's just not possible that women all by themselves are going to turn the tide.
And speaking of youth, Andy Hamilton, the president of NYU, he's not youth, but he has a particular commitment.
Oh yes, he was one of the presidents of universities that helped us to launch the He for She campaign. When he was in Oxford, he was one of the 10 presidents that helped us to start He for She. And of course, he wanted also to take his commitment and bring it here to NYU, but there were difficulties in bringing that. So the commitments that were made were tailor-made for the Oxford context. So NYU would have to, in a way, initiate its own commitments and make sure that there's a buy-in, which I don't think will be a problem. The students of this university have been very active in He4She, and I thank them for all the work that they have done to raise the gender flag everywhere they are, in the universities and in the community. And in September, when we had a 2-year celebration since He4She was launched, they, I think, represented the bulk of the youth that was in the house. So I think this really counts for something. Something is going right on this campus.
Well, thank you for inviting us to that. That was fantastic. Okay, great. So yes, we're already ready with questions. So we've got one there, and I believe there's some mics coming your way, and one over here on this side. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. It's John Parks.
Maybe stand up so we can all see you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's John Parks. First, I'll just say what an honor it is to be in this room with you and to hear you speak personally, your incredible career and ongoing service. My question would be this. Perhaps with particular attention to greater internet access and access in general, certainly not just South Africa, but throughout Africa, where do you see some of the better opportunities for change and improvement?
In South Africa or in Africa in general?
Both.
You want to take questions?
Yeah.
Jump in a group? Okay. In the basket. So please over there.
Hi, I'm Nunu Mashing. So in relation to your question about women's participation, and with the US elections, there was a record number of 5 women of color being elected to legislature. Maybe can you please talk about the importance of having women of color, of different abilities, of different gender, different genders, and the importance of their role in legislature?
Great. And in front of you, and then we'll pause, and then we'll take the next 3. So I notice you have a He4She badge. Great.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Sandra Barron, and I actually volunteer for the Metro chapter for the U.S. National Committee for UN Women. Very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for your words and for your encouragement in the cause. I was just going to ask, on piggybacking to the woman just behind me about quotas as well, in terms of women in politics. Do quotas work? Do they sustain after? do they drop off once the quota system ends? And then in general, how do you see what the U.S. could do better? Thank you.
Africa is one of the continents with the youngest population. So in theory, there is a potential for a demographic dividend if we're able to invest better in young people so that they are not a burden to the economy, but they actually are change makers. If one thinks of the Asian tigers, for instance, one of the important decisions that they made, as probably many of you will know, was their investment in primary education and secondary education and dedication to ensure that the youth, young people were as equipped as possible to be ready for higher education and for further skilling, and the quality of education, not just the quantity. So the issue of education, both quality and access in Africa, is a big issue that still needs to be won decisively. Even though out of the MDGs we saw a significant increase, for instance, of access to girls' education, we still have about 56 million young people who should be at school that are out of school across the continent. And those that are at school, we have many of them that never finish, the dropout rate is high, and the quality is worrying. So there's a lot that needs to be done about education, including teacher education. Secondly, I think the issue of jobs that work for people in the stage of development that many of our countries are in. For instance, in the sub-Saharan Africa, about 80% of the people work in the informal sector. That's quite high. You have pockets of countries like South Africa where maybe the numbers are not that high, but there's many people also in a country like South Africa that are falling between the cracks. And I think there has been a tendency for us to have macroeconomic policy that is designed for the people we wish to have and not the people we have, so that we can actually help to turn around their numbers. And there hasn't always been generosity in the private sector and good corporate citizenship that wants to help to lift those that are in the informal sector that is leading nowhere to do much better. So the leadership and policy making has got to be focused in cracking the problems that we have much more robustly and much more seriously. And then, of course, the issue of rights and movement building. We have seen in the last few years increasing shrinking of democratic space for civil society and for women's movement in many developing countries, including African countries. And once you do not have that, you actually reduce the number of people that can hold governments accountable. So continuing to encourage activism also remains important. In a strange, not strange, but in an encouraging way, is that the number of women who participate in politics in Africa is much higher than in many regions of the world. So we need to invest in that and to protect that, but also to enhance the quality of the contribution that the women are making, because there's room for improvement to make that quality, to mean that by women being present there, they actually change the nature and the dynamics of politics. And it's from circumcision. There are some countries where women are making significant changes, but there are some countries where women are not. But I think linking to the question that was asked by Nuno over there, it is important to have a diversity of women in leadership position, because with them, they bring their own issues and the solutions they wish to see for the constituencies they represent. There is strength in the participation of those who have experienced exclusion. Because privilege isn't always obvious to those who have it. So once you have the people who know what it is to be on the other side, they are likely to work for the changes that work for them as well. That's not changes that someone else defines for them. In India, just to give you an example, in the municipal councils that had higher representation of women, just something that is basic, higher number of municipalities had access to clean water because the women made sure that this was an absolute priority. And with that, you decrease waterborne, the occurrence of waterborne disease and many things that happen when you do not have clean water. But of course, in many countries also where you've got a higher participation and representation of women, you tend to get better bipartisan collaboration so that on issues that are central to the country and the community are addressed much more effectively. We see that in peace building. When women participate in peace agreements, in peace discussions, when they are consulted, their contribution is not about settling the score with the other, with the enemy. It is about reconciliation. It is about making sure that the communities will function better. It is about rebuilding schools, and it is about making sure that you make the economy work. So women's leadership and diversity is actually quite critical. And now that we know, we've been reminded again in these elections that women are not homogeneous. You need women of all classes, of all persuasions, so that you can make sure that the issues that arise will address the diversity of the needs that are there in society. And quotas work, people. Quotas and special measures work. There is hardly any country that has made significant progress where quotas or special measures of some sort were not used, starting with the Scandinavian countries where they have done so well. So I support quotas.
Quotas work, okay. So let's get another round of questions starting with Anna Christina and the lady behind. Ooh, a lot of questions now. Okay, how about short questions? Here in the front row, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ana Garcia, and it's such an honor to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. Well, my question is about the recent selection of the Secretary General of the UN. So after a campaign voting to have a woman as a head of the UN, so what do you think is the reason that they select a man? Not to say that Mr. Gutierrez is not good, but what does it need for a woman to be at the helm of the UN?
Okay, great. The lady behind you, please.
Thank you. Same here. Great admirer of your work. My name is Salima Yacoubi. My first quick question is about the election, and it feels that we're back to square one, and with a leader and a cabinet where we have messages that misogyny is okay. So what are the first steps to continue doing? And about women in the Middle East, are there any specificities, especially about the SDGs 5 on gender equality? Thank you.
Women in the Middle East, great. Now, there's a question at the way back. I'm doing this in the order that I saw your hands, and also, bringing people from the back to the front. That's what feminism is all about, from the margins to the center.
Hi, my name is Lenan Nguyen. I'm a journalist at Bloomberg News. My question is, how do you engage people, men and women, who are reluctant to discuss these issues? As we saw, we are in a liberal bubble in New York. How do we get outside that choir to engage more broadly?
Can you squeeze in one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, who's closer nearby? Okay, should we at the back, please?
Hi, my name is Xinhua Xu. I'm a graduate student at CGA. My question is about, I'm wondering, Madam, on the Secretary's opinion on gender budgeting. Like, how can we improve the budgeting process to ensure, to promote, to really invest in gender equality?
Great. Is that it? Yeah?
So, about the why did we not get a woman SG? You know, what is the UN? The UN is a sum total of member states who come to the UN with both the prejudices and bring with them the level of commitment there is to gender equality in their countries. And the decision that they will make will reflect the state of play in the world. So what we saw there, because even though we were campaigning and even though we were active, we actually not decision makers. Member states make that decision, and they make those decisions based on what they represent. I think it is very important for us to know that there is no country in the world that has achieved gender equality. So that tells you how hard it is to put in one room a collection of member states that will make the most progressive decision. I think the only thing that we absolutely have to be thankful for in this case is that the man that was chosen is a man we can all live with, and he is committed to the issue. I can change him, eh?
If I could just jump in, Margaret Wallström, the foreign minister for Sweden, met him last week and said, Antonia, you're Antonia as far as I'm concerned. We're not going to call you Antonia. The only difference between you and a woman is a skirt. From now on, you're a feminist and you're Antonia.
Yeah. So I think that also takes us back to the need for us to work in our countries, so that by the time they represent we the people in the United Nations, all of the best traditions that we'd like to see in the different countries are reflected. So there's a bottom-up work that we can never give up on, and there's also the top-down where we parachute in New York trying to convince those that sit around the table. But I think one lesson that we've learned that it is not enough. You need to work harder at all levels. In the US, I mean, I don't want to be your tutor on how to resist in the US. But I think you need not think about resistance more than about continuous building of an inclusive society. You need to give this a positive spin. You need to make sure that in the US, we actually take the message to the people who do not want to talk to us. Something that I keep telling my colleagues at UN Women. There will always be people amongst the people that do not agree with you that you can reach out to, that you can work with, that you can convince. And again, the importance of facts, evidence, and data is critical, because many of the issues that you are fighting against, poverty for instance, which impacts on women much more, greater ability for us to communicate with women about what kind of policy and a world that will work for them should help more women to move in the right direction, but also engaging men about the importance of making the cake bigger, so that you are not taking away what men have, but you are increasing. Now and again you can take some, but essentially you are increasing the cake so that more people can actually benefit from a growing economy. And one way of doing that, believe it or not, affordable, accessible childcare just changes the capacity of the countries to increase the labor market, to include women, to increase productivity, and therefore to make the economy work better for both men and women. And we need you to also become closer and to policymakers and to be policymakers in your right, so that you can also make these contributions, you can make these changes that we are talking about. We need US citizens in every part of the world to know their public representatives, to be active in their communities, and to not just be active just before the elections. In every country, we need to make sure that we're part and parcel of a civic discourse. We are contributing at local government level, at state level, and in all the areas. I guess there isn't a shortcut to some of these things. There's a lot of hard work, and I just think that in your generation, there's a better chance for us to get it right for most people of the world, because I think there's also a different outlook and expectations and demands from society that resonate well with the agenda that we are trying to. So I need you not to be discouraged, because I think change is possible. And winning people over, healing the country, helping everybody to work for an inclusive society can be made. But also, you still need to remain focused on exposing some of the challenges that the country faces, so that people know what it is that they're fighting against. So I'm not saying that sugar coats the problem, but you cannot be discouraged. I need you not to be. And just the issue of gender budgeting, this is one of the biggest initiatives that UN Women is part of. We are glad that the World Bank is also now active in the space. The IMF is active in the space, because they are the people that interact and work with ministers of finance who are critical for gender budgeting to be effective. We have at least 98 countries that I can say are trying very hard to make gender budgeting work, to increase the allocation of resources to those programs in governments that impact on women, such as public works that bring women on board, such as skills training that enhances the capacity of women to enter into the jobs that women are underrepresented in, targeted health interventions that decrease some of the avoidable diseases that impact on women, including reduction of maternal health. All of those are approaches to gender-responsive budgeting that ensures that the resources that are available in a country are not used in a manner that does not take into account what needs to be corrected in society. Interesting enough, in countries where you have got a strong women's caucus in parliament, gender budgeting is much stronger, because all departments and all ministers have to come to parliament to argue for their budget and to have it passed. If women are active and they're able to point out what needs to be done, why more money is needed to build infrastructure that is not just super highways, but access roads in village, access to water, access to also schools, access to latrines for both girls and boys. These are some of the basic interventions, in some cases that do not need a lot of money, that can otherwise change the fortunes of women and girls. One of the countries that is leading in gender gender responsive budgeting, and this is like the latest data, is Timor-Leste, believe it or not. They are getting it so right, in part because the tune from the top. The leadership is very focused on the issue, including the Minister of Finance. Rwanda is one of the countries that is getting it right. Uganda is one of those countries. Austria is one of those countries, and quite a few countries in Latin America also are getting it right. So we need a critical mass, a tipping point, so that gender responsive budgeting can become a way of life, a rule rather than an exception for most countries. Then let me just touch on the issue about Middle East. What was the question? It was to do with violence. Okay, yeah. Actually, all the SDGs are applicable in the Middle East. Goal 5, which is specific to women and girls, is also critical. The issue of representation of women in decision making is very critical. So we are working with the Arab League to address that. Of course, we work with governments and we work with civil society to increase the number of women. Some countries are now adopting quotas, not enough, and we are encouraging them to do that. And of course, one of the areas that we have identified in terms of just profiling women is the importance of IDs, because in a number of countries, sophisticated countries like Egypt, the number of women who do not have identification is actually a barrier to women accessing their rights. So we have got an active program that addresses that, but also just revisiting the laws that are barriers to women's, to gender equality and women's economic empowerment. In that area of our work, the Middle East is also an important area. We have already mapped the laws that need to change, a lot of laws that have to do with inheritance, with passing on of citizenship, with ownership of property. But the good thing about the Middle East is that the levels of education are relatively high. So you are not worrying about primary education in many countries. Access is relatively better, but it's the utilization of that education in order to make sure that you really make the lives of women better.
Thank you so much. I know there's more questions, and I do hope Phumzile will stay with us for a glass of wine. Miraculously, as
I think I've had a glass of wine, right?
Yeah, but also look at the cheese and all the yumminess. So, listen, everybody, in Half the Sky, Nick Kristof said, he starts the book by saying the real challenge of the 21st century is going to be working on women's rights, working on women's equality and gender equality. And I want to thank you so much for your struggle and your hard work on this. And Vera wants to say something as well.
Before you have the last word, Vera, can I just also just say something? This generation has an imperative to address. Because every generation, I think you have something to struggle for and scars to show for it. There was a generation that fought slavery. There was a generation that fought racism and colonialism. We are a generation that have got to overcome the issue of gender inequality. And until such time that gender inequality is an exception rather than a rule, which is what we have now, our work is not done. As Francis Fanon says, in every generation you have a mission. You can either betray it or you can achieve and implement the vision of that generation. I trust you to choose the latter.
Yeah.